We are all cargo pilots in one way or another, and today we get to hear from the experts on what safety and security challenges the cargo industry faces, whether that's aircraft rescue and firefighting requirements, security barriers, or one of the many other areas. We are looking forward to this exceptional discussion. I'd like to invite Captain Rich Hughey and his panelists on stage.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're glad you're here to listen to our panel of experts who will share their ideas about risks and protections for pilots flying at a Part 121 cargo airline. First thing to note is that by departures, cargo pilots fly about 10% of the Part 121 pie. The second thing to note has good and not so good implications. Across the top of this graph are fatal accidents for passenger airlines. Along the bottom are fatal accidents for cargo airlines since 2009. The not so good thing, or the good news, is that the bar for aviation safety excellence is set by Part 121 passenger airlines, and that we absolutely applaud that. The not so good thing to note is that cargo pilots are subject to a higher accident rate. And if you were to look back 5, 10, 20 years, cargo pilots are 7 to 13 times more likely to be involved in an accident with multiple fatalities. The unfortunate fact is that we have lost 16 cargo aviators since 2009. This is not because there's a difference in pilots. Part 121 passenger and cargo pilots have the same hourly requirements, same training requirements, fly the same airspace to the same airports. We believe the disparity is because there's different risks and protections. We share the same infrastructure, and like the passenger system, cargo is constantly ebbing and flowing based on many factors. What is not shared is the many hazards that are expressed differently. And when the protections are overlaid, the risk to cargo pilots appears quite deficient, even though we are part of the same Part 121 system. System protections follow a basic hierarchy that you see on the screen. Some are required, some are voluntary, some are adjudicated, and some are negotiated. These protections are important as they make up a multi-layered approach to managing risk. But are the protections equivalent across the 121 system? I believe not. These are but the three areas that we'll cover today, and there are many more. The protections and the risks do look different. From my perspective, the higher accident rate in cargo is potentially from an over-reliance on cost-benefit methods, which is an analysis of the financial benefit of implementing a safety protection versus the cost of that implementation. When safety and security decisions are solely based on cost-benefit methods, the math rarely, if ever, adds up for the cargo pilot. The over-reliance on cost-benefit methods is not new to aviation. Over 25 years ago, published in the final report of the White House Commission on Aviation Safety and Security was the following, I quote, "Cost considerations and mathematical formulas should never be dispositive in making policy determinations for aviation safety. They are one input for decision-making. Further, non-quantifiable safety and security benefits should be included in the analysis of proposals," end quote. So one great example of how this was applied and then changed is TCAS. Came to passenger aircraft in the mid-90s, did not come to cargo aircraft because of cost benefit until 1997, Air Force One had a near mid-air collision with a 747 cargo airplane. Then miraculously, TCAS was required on all cargo aircraft. So we have three beliefs that I want to share with you. Number one, we work in a system. Commercial aviation system includes many subsystems, 121, 135, cargo, passenger, scheduled, non-scheduled, and many others. 2, safety is not proprietary. We share the NAS, and as such, we share the risks in the system. And if we share the risks, we should also share in the responsibility to protect the system. Number 3, safety is a team sport. Whether you're part of an operator, a labor association rep, work for an OEM, or are in the regulator ranks, we're all engaged together to ensure the entire system remains safe. To substantiate these beliefs, consider Austin back in February, when 2 cargo pilots flying a FedEx 767 on a Cat 3 approach to 18 left executed a last-second go-around to avoid a collision with a Southwest 737 on takeoff roll. I'm pausing for effect. Who would have ever thought we'd hear the NTSB chair say about 2 cargo pilots say this? They saved, in my view, 128 people from potential catastrophe. That was quoted in a CNN article February 7th, just 4 days after that event. We all work in a system, and because system risk is shared, system protection is shared and should not be proprietary. The responsibility of system safety must then be a team sport. This is why ALPA believes in 1 level of safety. And now to carry on that discussion and how to achieve 1 level of safety for the cargo pilot, I'd like to introduce our distinguished panelists. Ms. Crystal Fallin is from the FAA's Office of Accident Analysis and Prevention and is a leader in the Joint Implementation Measurement Data Analysis Team. I didn't even have to look at my notes for that because I'm on the team with her. So GMDAT is where she is very, very effective, and that is the analysis arm that works for the Commercial Aviation Safety Team. Next to Ms. Fallin is Captain Darrin Dorn, who has 25+ years with Alaska Airlines flying both passenger and cargo aircraft. Captain Dorn also serves as ALPA Alaska's Security Committee Chair and is the ALPA National Aviation Security Vice Chair. Past Captain Dorn is Mr. Dick Hill from the FAA Technical Center and is a legendary subject matter expert in fire suppression and cargo compartment capabilities. To round out the panel is Captain Russ Leighton, who has 25 years with Airborne Express. Captain Leighton also serves as the safety chair for CAPA and is their representative to CAST. Ms. Fallin, you have the mic. Could you share with the audience your view on what CAST does and how it impacts commercial aviation, safety, and the cargo pilot?
Absolutely, thank you, Rich. And I just want to take a moment to thank you for inviting me to speak to the ALPA Safety Forum attendees and to sit next to these distinguished folks in cargo and security and safety. To give everyone kind of an overview of what the Commercial Aviation Safety Team is and our mission, it was formed in 1997 after the White House challenged both government and industry to work together to reduce the fatal accidents. At the time, we were having about 4 to 5 accidents every year, and that was unacceptable. I think everyone is in agreement on that. So to prioritize and to focus our efforts, GMDAT was formed underneath CAST, and it is the Joint Implementation Measurement Data Analysis Team, as Rich noted earlier. And GMDAT began doing the analysis work for CAST. So it is the working arm of CAST. And GMDAT started bucketing all the accidents into occurrences so that the ones that were the most severe were targeted first. If everything's important, nothing's important. So initially, the occurrence categories that we sought after were loss of control in flight, approach and landing, and what we did was we've used the term fatality risk. And when I say fatality risk, what I mean is we needed a way to quantify the risk of an accident because we had a lot of turbulence-related accidents. However, turbulence doesn't necessarily kill people, so we wanted to focus on where we are having fatalities. And what that means is we take the number of fatal on board divided by the total passengers, crew members on board. So if we had a fully fatal passenger aircraft with 200 people on board, it would be a fatality risk score of 1. And if we had a cargo accident with 3 pilots on board that were all fatally injured in the accident, that would also have a fatality risk score. And what that did was it took out the chance occurrence of load factor and the type of airplane, because the accidents that we're seeing weren't really related to the aircraft or the number of people on board was a chance occurrence. So we focused our efforts. We launched studies on the two categories that I mentioned. We made sure we fully understood the risk in the system, and then we developed mitigations to address that through the form of voluntary safety enhancements. So everything CAST does, it's a voluntary partnership with industry, that we work together, we share data, we share information, and we agree on the risk, we agree on what mitigations that we feel are feasible to implement. There's a lot of good ideas out there, but not necessarily all good ideas are feasible ideas. So we work with industry to agree on that, implement those mitigations. We establish metrics to monitor how we're doing. Maybe we have to adjust what we're doing. Maybe we have to go on road shows and encourage people to adopt our safety enhancements, and that can sometimes be a challenge. As Rich noted with the cost benefit, sometimes it's hard to quantify safety in the terms of lives. So we worked through our accident Pareto, and we've now reached a point in time where we are very safe. If you can bring up that one slide. When we look at our recent accident categories from Colgan forward, if you note, there's 2 accidents in cargo that are highlighted. Those are the only 2 accidents that we have causal factors that are only related to cargo. Any other accident categories could happen on either a passenger or a cargo aircraft. So that's an important note. And GMDOT recognized that, and we established a cargo working group to look at, as the highest threat to our CAST accident set, or our CAST goal, which is to reduce fatality risk in the system, we needed to understand better what was happening in cargo and figure out if the safety mitigations we have in place are effective. Are we missing something? If they're not effective, what else can we do to address this? And as a result of this analysis, we had 3 safety enhancements come out of that. Technically 4, sorry, I misspoke. 2 of them are research and development, and they're really looking at the fire aspect. So one of them, the way it's designed is we want to prevent fires on board. If we have a fire on board, we want to have a way to mitigate it. And if we can't mitigate it, we want to make sure that the crew can survive the accident. So when you look at the CAST safety enhancements targeted towards cargo, we're really looking at the aircraft compartment level. We're looking at what fire suppression and detection capabilities are available, and then what means is available to maintain the pilot's view of critical flight systems if the cockpit is overwhelmed with smoke. So from that work, we adopted those safety enhancements, and Dick Hill will cover some of that work here in a second. But what else we found was we were only looking at accident, the end result. What are the items in the system leading up to that accident? So when you look at the system that cargo operates in, that's where the unique aspects started to come out of it. The first one being they often operate at night on the back side of the clock during the window of circadian low. They're often operating aircraft with hazmat on board. They're often operating into airports that don't have air traffic service or ARF on site, which presents additional challenges once they land for movement around airports with wide-body aircraft. When you look at the distribution of the aircraft in the cargo ops, cargo operators have 75% of their fleet makeup of wide-body, where passenger ops, they have 9% of their aircraft that are wide-body aircraft. So when we started to look at this as a system, we realized there are opportunities where we can improve in multiple areas. So GMDOT is still continuing to work through our assessment. We're working through all of the research that Dick Hill has done at the Tech Center to figure out what technologies can we bring forward from that research as a formal safety enhancement in terms of fire detection and fire suppression, both at the aircraft level and at the container level. And when we look at fire suppression on an aircraft, there are operators who elect to remove fire suppression systems from during the conversion, or order aircraft without fire suppression installed. And that's something that GMDOT's trying to promote in our safety portfolio, is that if there's safety mitigations already on the aircraft, encouraging folks not to remove those. So that's part of our assessment now, and we hope to have a prepared package where it's the Ford motor cars version, like here's one way you might increase safety at the container level, and then the whole Mercedes-Benz version where you have the container and the aircraft safety mitigations paired together. And I believe So once we worked through the cargo fire thing, we did make a recommendation in October to the commercial aviation safety team to establish a pilot fatigue working group. And the mission of this group is to collect lessons learned and best practices for fatigue risk management. And we know that fatigue will defeat any safety barrier that we have. So if there's an opportunity to collect best practices from the industry and share it to operators that might not have as robust as a fatigue risk management system, that is our goal. So that work is underway, and we anticipate having those best practices published in the end of next year, and we hope to maybe come back here and share what those are at a future date. And I believe that concludes. Did I miss anything?
No, I think you hit it all. Thank you very much. Excellent. Captain Dorn, the floor is yours to share what you know and think about cargo security on cargo aircraft.
Well, every ALPA pilot in this room, guess what? You're a cargo pilot. Are you hauling passenger bags? Are you hauling overnight express cargo? Or are you like some of our carriers? A lot of carriers during the COVID found themselves on 777s and 787s with passengers in first class seats. Every pilot's a cargo pilot. And our mantra is one level of safety, so we have to all get on board to support our cargo side. I can't start, Rich, until I mention Preston Green. Yeah. Captain Preston Green, FedEx, and Captain Rich Hughey here are the experts in regard to cargo aviation security. Preston was unable to be here, and I hope I can do justice to his knowledge. So I wanted to get that. But let's set the stage a little bit, if we can, on the cargo arena. 121 passenger carrying aircraft, around 4,500 in the industry. And these numbers are probably about 12, 18 months old. Out of those 4,500 aircraft, 10 to 12% are wide body. So 450 aircraft roughly are wide body. Now let's take a look at the cargo side of the house. Roughly 1,100 121 cargo aircraft in the industry. 75, 80% of those aircraft are wide bodies. So 2 to 1, pretty close on that number. And we know the potential of wide body aircraft based off 9/11 and even some of the accidents, we can see the damage that can do. As I look at the difference on the passenger and screening, Rich, I'd say there's two big ones. Number one, the IRCDs, or the intrusion resistance cockpit doors, being mandatory on our passenger aircraft, and the type of screening that passengers on cargo aircraft undergo. Man, I wish I had a great memory like 40 years ago, but I want to give everybody the definition of a supernumerary. So if someone is attending cargo on an aircraft, whether it's FedEx or Alaska or whoever, a lot of times they will put a supernumerary on that aircraft. And by Webster's, the definition of a supernumerary is exceeding the usual, standard, or prescribed, or exceeding what is necessary or required. So FedEx, other cargo carriers, they do a lot of animal handling. So you're going to take an individual that's not necessarily a crew member, is not necessarily a U.S. citizen, and you're going to put them in the cockpit of a wide-body airplane in close proximity. So that is a big, big concern. So when we look at these supernumeraries versus our traditional passenger screening, on the passenger side, you're going to make a reservation. You're going to have a PNR created on you. That information's going to TSA. It's going to go through the TSA Target Vetting Center. It's going to go through Customs and Border Protection if it's an international flight. And they have pretty good databases. They access every database within the U.S. system. And most of our Five Eyes partners, which would be Australia, New Zealand, Canada, England, and the United States. We call those our Five Eyes partners. We have a very good criminal database exchange with them. When it comes to foreign nationals, a lot of times we depend on the host governments. So I have an animal handler, pick any country, El Salvador, Costa Rica, Argentina, Venezuela. We depend on those host nation countries to assist us with the screening of that passenger if they elect to share the information with us, and if they elect to share 100% of the information with us. Additionally, there's 18 states out there, probably more by now, since what's happening on the southern border, that give driver's licenses to illegals. And driver's license is a key form of identification for our aircraft. So the vetting of those individuals is a concern, and not having that IRCD is a concern. In the law enforcement circles, there's a term called reactionary gap. And the rule they use for that is called the Tueller Rule, named after a Salt Lake police officer, Dennis Tueller. And what they found is a law enforcement officer facing a threat at a distance of 21 feet, looking at the threat, knowing that that individual is going to charge him with an impact weapon or an edged weapon, will not be able to get his weapon out of the holster to engage that target. So anytime somebody's within 21 feet of you, you're in the danger zone. And when we look at our 7.5 or our 7.6 cockpit, even our 777s, that distance is 6 feet. And you've got your back turned to that subject. So as we put these passengers, supernumeraries being the proper term, into the cockpit in that close proximity, we all know how easy it is to be focused flying the airplane, navigating the airplane, communicating with your fellow crew members. Very easy for that individual to strike at the cockpit crew. FedEx, historically, as an example everyone knows with a FedEx crew member. Add in the fact that a lot of these supernumeraries are carrying sedatives and tranquilizer guns, if you will. If they're traveling with horses or they're traveling with other animals that become upset or could behave erratically based off a thunderstorm or turbulence or anything along those lines, those animal handlers that are in the cockpit have a bag with a syringe and a sedative in it. How easy would that be to punch that in the back of a crew member? So there's a real concern, not only on the background check piece, but the access to the cockpit. So having those IRCDs on board and making sure those supernumeraries are behind the locked door, no different than all of our passenger pilots have that comfort, is a must-have. It's just non-negotiable. Screening and vetting, IRCDs, those would be what I see, not talking about hazmat, but in regards to the screening and the access to the cockpit would be my two big concerns.
Right on. Thank you, Darrin. Appreciate that very much. Mr. Dick Hill, thank you for being here. We're passing the clicker to you. He has a PowerPoint presentation, and Dick is going to talk about what the FAA Tech Center has been researching lately in regards to cargo fires. Dick, you got the floor.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you for the invitation to do that. Our fire research and the approach to lithium battery safety, just as an aside, we do work on other hazmats. We've did a lot of work on dry ice and the carriage of disinfectants and auto ignition temperature, those. But today I'm going to focus on the lithium battery safety. And we look at 4 distinct areas for doing research. It's kind of layered. The first is prevention, which is the more effective. If you can prevent something from happening, then you don't need the rest of the interventions. The second is an intervention. The third is mitigation. And the final is fire detection and suppression if something happens. So for prevention, we at the Tech Center have been involved with the UN looking at a better classification system of lithium and lithium-ion batteries. Not all lithium batteries are horrendous when it comes to fire. Most of them are. We want to encourage the design of new batteries to be more fire resistant and fire safe. So we're looking to help the UN develop a classification system that is based on hazard. Propagation, fire, the amount, and the type of gas that comes off. We also have been working to produce information for ICAO to push them towards requiring 30% state of charge or less for batteries in and with equipment. We have that for batteries in bulk, but presently batteries in and with equipment can be carried at full charge. It had been in the past that we didn't think it was a hazard that could defeat the airframe systems, but because of the increase in energy density over the past 5 to 6 years, we're getting to the point where even though they're spaced because they're in equipment and there's other material between them and the next set of batteries, they can still pose a problem. And we're providing support to the airlines in doing their SMS, providing information on batteries, battery type, what the hazards are, and how they could be mitigated. And we have a website, which there's a link on the presentation that takes you to this information that hopefully is easily usable by the airlines and can be used within their SMS program. The second is intervention. Intervention, one of the things we've looked at recently is having a working dog be able to distinguish batteries that are not allowed. So you have an undeclared shipment, the dog can sniff them out. You have batteries that are damaged or have a problem, the dog can sniff them out. We've done some tests and it's been very successful in the dog's reaction to those cells. We've also done a study looking at the present transport of batteries and the required 30% stated charge and how well it is being complied with. Purchasing some cells, we worked with CAPA in actually CAPA buying some cells and sending them to us for analysis and looking at, in e-commerce, how things are going. And it painted a pretty bleak picture of people complying with the regulations. And our hazmat office is looking to take some action to try to get that corrected. Mitigation. There's the G27 packaging standard, which if any of you have been involved is going on and on and on, but it's the development of a packaging requirement to safely transport bulk cells. SAE AGE2 testing, which is basically looking at ULDs and covers and coming up with a standard for the carriage of lithium and lithium-ion cells. Presently, there are fire-resistant containers and covers. They meet an SAE standard, but the standard does not include testing with lithium batteries and cells. So we're working with SAE. We're trying to develop a standardized fire load, maybe an adjustable one, and you come up with a range of standards so that you know what that container or cover is capable of when it comes to protection from lithium battery fires. And lastly, we're working with UL in the standard development of fire suppression and detection systems within a container. So you have a container, and inside that container, you're going to have their own detection system and a suppression system. So what are the standards? What's it going to be designed to? UL has put together a group to start developing that standard, and we're supporting that in fire safety. And lastly, fire detection. If all else fails and something actually happens on your flight, how do we make those consequences acceptable? How do we get the plane down and the crew safe? So one of the things we're looking at is early fire detection using passive and wireless temperature sensing tags. These tags, they're little paper tags, cost less than $1 a piece. They're passive. They can go in a container. They don't require a battery. They just stick in there and can stay there forever. You have a system on the airplane that then reads the temperature of that tag, and we're looking at how fast you would detect that in comparison to the smoke detectors that are now on board the airplane, and what that would do for you in providing early detection and suppression without increasing the risk of false alarms. And that's a major problem. We're also looking at improvements to Class E fire suppression capabilities. In the past, we've looked at it and found that if you went to a Class C, it's not cost effective. We get back to the risk-benefit models, and it's well out of cost-benefit for putting a Class C into the Class E's. They're so large, and in fact, we probably wouldn't have the agents to be able to do that today anyhow. Going to give you a little idea of what we're talking about here, and that is a cost-effective Class E from our past data, and I'll show that in a second. The major problem is descent. And the problem is in descent, you're drawing air or oxygen into your compartment. And if you have depressurized, you have a lot of unburnt hydrocarbons that have collected, and the descent is going to cause a much bigger fire, larger pressures. You can't relieve the pressure because air is coming in. The pressure can't go out, and it forces the hazards into the flight deck. So we're going to look at, can we effectively use a suppression system already on the airplane or one that we put on specifically for it for that 15 minutes of suppression you need for descent. So we're going to be looking at the halon that's already on board the airplane. All airplanes have it for their engines and APU. Would that be available? Could you use that for that 15 minutes? What will it do for you? Is it enough? Maybe not. Maybe in combination. Some airplanes have Class C lower lobes, which would have additional agent. Some airplanes are flying with inerting systems, which would give you nitrogen-enriched air, which could be used to supplement and give you protection. Or can we add an agent such as a zoned water mist that only discharges for that 15 minutes you need it and only in a specific area where you're having high temperatures? So you can find more on this, which is our website. To give you an example, this is a curve of full-scale tests we did looking at cruising at 8,000 feet, having a fire. The initial blue spike is the initial burning, and you burn up oxygen in that area, and then the fire kind of subsides. You can see the sort of pink slide temperatures coming up. So as you keep going, the fire's burning a little bit more. You're burning up oxygen, getting the fire to burn more. But it's the descent. It's that last peak when you're trying to come down that you have to protect against, because that's what's going to push everything into the cockpit. That's what's going to do most of the damage to the aircraft. If you depressurize, you can control the fire for a long period of time without those increases. You see the temperatures are well below that 600 we got where we were just descending. We can control the fire until we start to descend. And when we descend, the fire is even more severe than if we hadn't depressurized. And that's where we need the suppression. But it's only for that 15 minutes that you need to get down. So we think we can come up with a system that will give you protection when you need it that would be cost effective. And that's the research we plan on doing over the next few years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dick. It's progress for sure, and I'm grateful for the work the FAA Tech Center and you yourself and your team do. Very much appreciated. Captain Leighton, you are our final panelist, and we've asked you to talk a little bit about fatigue. And as a cargo pilot, I'm sure you have firsthand experience on what that might be. The floor is yours.
So like Crystal was saying, the time of day that we operate in obviously depends on our business model, and not all things are created equal. And when we do approach these issues, Rich had mentioned it's not proprietary, and it's not. When we go in the room, whether it's at CAST or something like this, InfoShare, we are not, we don't go in wearing our ELPA, CAPA, or Teamster hats. When we're collaborating with the FAA, the industry folks, DOT, NTSB, whoever that might be, we're all there as safety volunteers and trying to get some work done. Rich and I were talking when we were first planning this discussion, trying to figure out how long we've been doing this, and he and I have been collaborating for at least a decade, maybe more. Steve Jangelis down there is at CAST with us quite often. It's rare we disagree on anything, really. And when we do, we react in a very strange way. We agree to disagree and go have dinner and a beer. Not all that common these days, but that's how we do it. So this different business model that we end up in, where we have cargo predominantly flying at night for reasons that we all understand. The customers want their drone that they bought on Amazon the next day at 8:30. And unfortunately for Dick, they'd like it to arrive with the battery fully charged, which is another battle all by itself. But the fact is, and the scientists will tell you, and I was on the rulemaking committee that created 117, humans were not meant to be up at night, and we were not meant to sleep during the day. As much as you might think that you can adapt to that, you cannot. You can find different tricks and techniques to mitigate the effects of that as much as possible, ways to sleep a little bit during the day, ways to try to get a nap at night when it matters. But the bottom line is, working at night is going to reduce your health and shorten your lifespan, and that's just how it is. So within that framework, we do the best that we can. And, an easy way to look at it, and you don't even have to be a pilot to imagine this, but just take a really onerous duty day for a small ACMI carrier whose flight and duty time limits are the FARs, not something from a CBA. So a 16-hour duty day for a crew of 2. Starting out at 8 in the morning and finishing at midnight is a very long day. Just flip that a little bit. Starting out at 8 p.m. and finishing at noontime, that doesn't even sound like the same numbers. It's the exact same numbers. It makes me tired talking about it. Doing it 2 or 3 days in a row is not even viable. But there's a lot of folks out there, and we're asking them to do exactly that. We thought when we all sat in a room together in 2010 and 2011 and created what became Part 117, we thought that maybe we had fixed that. The law from Congress was that the DOT and FAA would create regulations for all commercial pilots. People forget that. Immediately, the first law that they decided to break was to carve out Part 135. And then they were a little bit more cruel with us cargo folks. They waited until the day of the big announcement. And at the end of the announcement, let us know that this would not apply to all cargo operations. So, and I will tell you that the FAA, even though they had to be the voice of that, they were as much victims in that as we were. There was a cost-benefit analysis that was done, and I have not ever talked to an FAA person behind closed doors or even often in person, including administrators and acting administrators, that don't say that they believe that there should be one level of safety and that all pilots should be in Part 117. But the cost-benefit analysis was a flawed straw man set up to have something to blame for the folks that politically wanted cargo to not be in that regulation. And we could do an entire presentation on all the flaws that were in there. And a couple of the really ironic ones that punctuate its legitimacy that people forget is that 50-seat RJs at the end of the cost-benefit analysis, the 117 didn't meet the cost-benefit numbers for them either. However, nobody wanted a lot of congressmen who make it back to their districts in a 50-seat RJ to be the first victims of fatigued pilots that were operating under different rules, and somehow we'd have to explain that. And then the other unforgotten tidbit in there is the cost-benefit analysis was not controlling. They could have looked at the analysis and said, hey, the numbers don't work, but the risk is too high. We need one level of safety. We need all pilots to be in this mitigation, which we all know is not perfect. There will never be a perfect flight and duty time scheme because humans are humans and they're different. But with the current science and what we know now, it's the best set of rules that we were able to come up with. We don't ever use cost in most of our safety risk assessments, right? We have likelihood of an event happening and the severity. It's rare that costs come into there. Now, we all know that cost is running in the background. You could make things so expensive that airplanes wouldn't fly and then they wouldn't crash. So that would solve that. But in the cargo world, it would be really low-hanging fruit and an easy mitigation to say that this was done for scientific-based reasons, and we need to have all pilots in the regulation. When COVID-19 came along, a lot of aviation got paused. In the cargo world, we only got busier. We suddenly had to start getting people their toilet paper, all kinds of other necessities that were being bought online so that folks didn't have to go to grocery stores. And then we had to start getting the vaccine to every corner of the world. Our flying only increased. We couldn't hire fast enough to keep up with it. We had folks flying as much overtime as they could and exposing themselves to even more of this risk of fatigue that they shouldn't be exposed to begin with, and they did a great job. And you know, we were doing all of that, and Crystal brought up some of this too, but besides the risk of fatigue that we have from flying at night, there's a whole bunch of other things that we do in the cargo world that compound that. Flying big airplanes into small airports, uncontrolled airports, airports that are primarily GA airports. And on the rare occasion we're showing up at 8 or 9 in the morning and the bug smashers are all out there like a hornet's nest. They're trying to weave a 767 into all of that with a couple of guys that may have been up for the last 16 hours. So not an ideal situation for sure. And if you think about it, we have a whole bunch of ways that we could be more proactive and more predictive when it comes to fatigue. When we had the recent call to action, one of the ideas that we put forward on the association side was getting fatigue data into the national database. You know, you think of all the things we have in there now through ASAP reports and FOQA, and they're great things to have in there, but we have mountains of fatigue data that only exist within the carrier itself. I believe United has started ending up with fatigue data in ASIAS because of the fact that they're using ASAP reporting to report their fatigue. And so that's a step in the right direction. But just think if we looked at unstable approach data the same way we look at fatigue data and said, wow, you know, we have a ton of it. It looks pretty scary. It's happening quite often. Folks aren't going around as much as they should. This data is really probably too scary to have in a system where everybody can have visibility into it. So we'll just keep that within the family at our airline. That's exactly what we're doing with fatigue data. It would be great in any risk assessment, even in CAST. Let's think about some recent things we're working on in CAST, like doing the circling approach into San Bernardino, California. Wouldn't it be nice when we're doing that risk assessment to know how much fatigue is running in the background of that operation? Because we know the folks that are doing the flying in there, and we don't have to identify anybody, but we could be looking at you know, how much fatigue is being reported as folks try to do this extremely complicated maneuver in mountainous terrain. So it's a chance to be proactive and predictive, and we're not using it. So, you know, our mantra, and Rich's mantra especially, is always that we're, you know, we believe in one level of safety. We believe that everybody should have been placed in the same regulation. And, you know, like the security briefing just mentioned, everybody in here is a cargo pilot, and everybody in here does do some night flying. There's the red eyes, there's stand-up overnights to the extent that those still exist. And, but those are mitigated somewhat by 117. In our world, it is not. There is a huge difference even in the cargo world itself, between carriers that are hauling their own freight like FedEx and UPS versus the ACMIs that have a lot less negotiating power. Because on the ramp in Cincinnati serving DHL and Amazon, I think there's something like 18 of us. So any attempt to negotiate something better is met with, well, we'll just have airline ABC do the flying, so forget you guys. So there's a lot going on there, and it's a lot of information in a short amount of time. But I'd close out by saying, let's do a couple of what ifs. What if Atlas Flight 3596 going into Houston had their accident a little bit, maybe 3 more miles into the approach, and ended up in the suburbs instead of a marsh? What if the folks, the guys flying FedEx 1432, would have been a little bit more fatigued, or maybe overcame fatigue in a way that was pretty heroic, to realize during a Cat 3 approach that there was a 737 on the roll underneath them? And then, what if UPS 1354, where that captain and FO spent half the flight talking about how tired they were and how hypocritical it was that they were flying under a different set of regulations than their passenger partners. And then they got dumped in from a high altitude, from a controller that was probably just as tired as they were, into a black hole. And according to their site picture, I'm sure they thought they looked good, but there was a hill in that black hole. A few hundred feet to the right, they would have been into some houses. So would any one of these have changed the rule? I bet you it would have. And that's how regulations get written in this industry, right? They get written in blood. So are we going to do that? The folks in this room aren't, but we're not the decision makers. We're going to push hard as we can, but unless something changes historically about how these things happen, it's going to take another one of these, and it's going to take it, going into an apartment building, an elementary school, something like that. Let's do whatever we can. It's all safety pros and volunteers in this room, and let's not let this happen. That's all I have, Rich.
All right. Thank you very much, Russ. And I'd like to just take this moment to thank the entire panel for their contribution to achieving one level of safety for the cargo pilot. Please give them a round of applause.